Hi, this is Mina Malik Hussain, and you're watching The Coffee Table. Today we have, well, I know I always say we have an interesting show lined up, but this is one that's really going to sort of get your brain cells going. Because today we're here to talk about the Indus Valley civilization, we're here to talk about ancient civilizations of the world, and we're here to talk about the artifacts that belong to them and where they are right now. As you might know, France has recently repatriated almost 400 pieces of ancient pottery from Pakistan that were being taken, that had been taken to France to be sold to an art gallery. But France has got different now repatriation rules and laws in place, and they've been returned. So that sort of really sparked a conversation, and it's added to the ongoing conversation, I might say, about artifacts and to whom do they really belong. So joining us today on set to talk more about this is Hannan R.Hussain, who is a policy analyst and a columnist for The Diplomat, and Mr. Akhtar Mummunka, who runs Indus Guides, which is a tour company, and is also quite the expert on the Indus Valley civilization, in addition to being a writer and a painter. So sort of illustrious, clever men on set today. Hello, gentlemen. Thank you for being with us today.
Our pleasure.
It's great to have you guys. So, Akhtar Saab, tell me, you've been running Indus Guides Indus tours for how long?
Oh, I started this company way back in 1984.
Oh, all right.
Previously, I used to work for Pakistan Airlines, and I was posted in Spain. I spent 4 years there, and thereafter I was posted to another very, very interesting place. That was Cairo, Egypt, and the Nile Valley civilization, so that we can make a comparison between Indus Valley civilization and the Nile Valley civilization.
Yes, that would be quite valuable.
You have two rivers which have really given birth to two civilizations, similar, same time, but totally different in concept.
Oh, and why is that?
Yeah.
Concept of what?
Concept is totally, see, because the Indus Valley civilization basically was for general people.
Okay.
People, because you had all these things, you have the public baths, you had the granary, you had everything, the water canals.
And mercantile, and people doing trade on the river.
Everybody was involved, everybody was involved. It was for the people.
Right.
Whereas the Nile Valley civilization, it was purely for the pharaohs and their death. So that's why in the pharaohs' war, they wanted to show pomp and show and create fear into the people. That's why you see the massive structures of the pyramids of Valley of Kings, Karnak temples, or whatever you have. They are massive and huge. And mostly they were built after death.
Yes, quite right, because the pyramids were essentially tombs.
The Indus Valley civilization was not for the dead. It was for the living.
For the living. That's true, actually, and that's, I think, a really valuable point, that the Indus Valley civilization and even the ruins that we found now, there are no such enormous structures. They're not meant to sort of shock
but they're more
creative
things, more on modern lines. Frankly speaking, when you look at Mohenjo-daro and the way the city was planned, it was far better planned than most of the cities that we are doing now. Look at Lahore, what we have done to Lahore, with all these metros and things like that. We have really spoiled a city of gardens and turned it into a mess.
Yes.
And same applies to our northern areas. When you go to Hunza, it used to be a beautiful place. You could see the mountains, you could see the glaciers, you could see all those beautiful things. What happened now? You have just concrete buildings.
Right.
Now, that is something has to be done. And that's when we're talking of civilization, we are really spoiling a civilization.
Quite right. And I think that even with the ruins, and Hannan, are you familiar with Mohenjo-daro and Harappa and sort of our sort of Indus kind of, well, I don't want to say relics, really, remains?
No. well.
What we've excavated.
These used to be actually cornerstones of the Indus Valley civilization. I think we've known that until now. And then, as Sir rightly pointed out, this was an organic and indigenous, a subsistence-based sort of a civilization, as opposed to the more rule-centric ones that we've seen in other parts of the world. When we talked about artifacts, of course, France returning these has had a lot of implications, especially when we really want to trace the roots to which Balochistan and its diverse cultural DNA gets back to. Part of that is also by mid-2014, the government of Italy had actually returned about 300 of such artifacts to the Pakistan mission in Rome, which had basically got to do with Mehergarh in Balochistan, which is
one of
the
older.
The oldest,
one of the
older than
oldest, one of the oldest agricultural footprints in the whole of South Asia.
Yeah.
So in order to kind of do justice to that information, kind of put it out in the limelight, it's really important to get hold of these relics and, of course, identify Pakistan's cultural makeup in the south and in the north in its entirety.
I think that's really important, is to think about Pakistan not just as a country that is 47 onwards, we are actually inheritors of an incredibly ancient, incredibly significant civilization. Sort of, it's astounding, really.
Basically, when you talk of the subcontinent, this was the melting pot of all civilizations. Everyone who came here only came here, never went to Calcutta or Chandigarh or wherever.
Sort of farther inland.
So everything, the Greeks came here, or whosoever came here. All the civilizations, everything was,
stayed around the Indus,
and,
sort of
then, the Gandhara civilization, everything went because of the mixture of people coming in and going out. And even before that, when you look at, we have not really explored totally our salt range. That again is a very, very old, you find so many things there, starting from so many people coming in and
right. And again, like you said, the Greeks, the sort of the Mughals, and all sorts
Mongols,
of people were sort of coming
everybody came here,
towards
and they were mixing.
This was kind of like the transit for a lot of these rules that kind of got established and then went forth. And then, of course, as we see today, the modern global cultural economy is run by transit centers, the financial capitals. This was kind of like the civilizational capital of South Asia, kind of
that's an important point.
Getting onto its feet. But the main thing, of course, is that it wasn't structured to deliver to a specific sort of an order. It was right there to kind of promise that economic as well as the self-development subsistence that we basically require for people to kind of engage in practices. Agriculture that we see and we proudly represent by various countries today that boast themselves as nation states. All of that agricultural DNA kind of gets concentrated over here. And it's just amazing to see how it was just a free flow interplay among so many actors, so many civilizations that has led us to it. And the only wish is, of course, that we do justice to it by actually remembering those roots and then building upon those fundamentals as we progress.
Absolutely, because how can we have a conversation, even internationally, about bringing back what's ours unless we really own what it is to be historically part of this particular part of the world, really. So, I think that is quite important.
And apart from that, we have also to realize that this part of the world, which is now Pakistan, gave birth to a lot of religions as well. We have to understand that. Mahayana Buddhism spread into China and Central Asia over the Silk Road.
Yes.
We had the oldest Sanskrit university out here.
Really? Where was that?
That was in Ketas Raj.
Of course, that makes sense.
You see that the Hinduism that you have there. Then we have the oldest educational at the Julian, that was a university of Buddhist monks and everybody traveled to for education there. And the entire Swat Valley was called Udyana, or the garden.
It
was.
By whom?
By the Buddhists, that time they were traveling all over the world. So this is what we have. Then we have the Sikhism, we have the Buddhism, we have the Jainism, we have the Hinduism, and then of course we have the Sufism.
Yes, and again, because of the Indus Valley and the fact that it was this incredibly fertile area to be, it was easy to access, and so many people came from all over the world, bearing this knowledge and this culture, and it all just kind of, melting pot sounds like a cliche, but it's really true in this instance.
And we've also seen an intercontinental mix of what I'd say would be this cultural heritage that was not exactly indigenous to subcontinent at some point in time. At one point, the Western Belt that we kind of identify between Karachi and Gwadar, the entire Western Strip,
so across along the coast.
Once occupied by the slaves that were taken out by the Omanese rulers, kind of imported in from the African side. So there's this, even though it seems like quite an oppressive sort of a thing, but as Sir rightly pointed out, these are all different variations of the racial, ethnic, and the cultural makeup that goes to define it's not just a question about Pakistan, the entire civilization. It is about all of us remembering things as a whole, even though today the modern governance system is defined by territorial boundaries as opposed to a larger civilization. The religious makeup, of course, is always astounding. I kind of get to see Sanskrit and all of these, different schools that once occupied this part of the world in abundance.
Yes.
Today, that might not exactly be the case, but at least we could associate ourselves with that because all the leading democracies in the world and cultural, civilizational states, such as China as well, kind of take pride in all that went right as well as what went wrong.
Obviously,
in this part
that's
of the world.
So when you say what went wrong, how would that apply to this part of the world?
Well,
Like in terms civilizationally.
civilizationally, it's a far more broader concept, but what went wrong at the time was, for once, you did not have the civil will among the people be guaranteed by a larger order. We saw interchanging empires being taken over. It was all about the length of territorial influence that you could hold to kind of assert yourself on an influence. So this entire concept of, democratic neutrality was absent once in this part of the world.
And then maybe because there was just so many invaders almost constantly, so maybe the people in this area just kind of learned to adapt to that. This sort of changing order of or changing powers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you raise an integral point here. Even if you take a Middle Eastern angle, let's just equate this to a different concept. When we talk about Syria, it has not always been about the Persian roots and everything. It has been a long, continuing romance between the Persian and the Roman roots that continue to define what Syria is. But the fact of the matter is, for the past decade, ever since the civil war has been taking place, Syria, even though the government has tried to get hold of the relics to kind of help it identify what kind of a heritage root does it have. Western powers, as we'll get to it in just a while, haven't been able to promise that. So no country, if Iran is seen as a purely Persian sort of an example, has been in a constant process of evolution for a longer period of time. And it's important for these very artifacts to kind of remind us of how that evolution took place and where it went on to define the diversity that we kind of identify ourselves proudly with.
Right. So what you're saying is that it's very difficult to trace that kind of historical legacy if we don't have the markers of it.
Yeah.
And in many ways, things like manuscripts, art, artifacts, there are different kinds of things that comprise artifacts. So even up north, near Mardan and things, even now people are just sort of digging a field and Buddhist relics will just sort of pop up, literally
out of the
in
ground.
the earth, little carved heads of Buddha, and there's still so many stupas, and there's still so much out there. I really wonder how much is still here for us to discover, because archaeologically we haven't, I think, made the kind of inroads that, for example, have been made in Egypt.
Yeah, that's true, but you see, look at, for example, we have 36 definite sites in Choristan, which I call the land of the lost river. Because as you know, there used to be a river, Saraswati, that used to flow from
Tell us more about that, because I think a lot of people don't know about that.
The Saraswati river was basically in the desert, and it was covering all the forts of the desert. Now, we have river Satluj, and then next to it, right in the middle of the desert, this used to flow. It was also called Hakra. They called it the Hakra civilization. And centuries ago, whatever happened, that river vanished. And with that, a whole civilization, it's buried under the sea, but under the sand. And in 1976, there were massive monsoon rains and floods. And the Indians let the water, flow. And the river followed its old course and passed by all the forts. Starting from Navallar Fort and then Fort Abbas and Marot and the rest of the forts. So the water
sort of started going in the old channel.
All of the old channel.
Wow,
and
that's almost like magic.
And the people of the desert still believe, and that includes me, that one day, and there is a beautiful saying, Saraswati Sai Vasi, Tijarj Machi Asi, which means the Saraswati will flow again and we'll catch the fish again.
In it.
Well, this is the hope of the people of the desert.
So when the flood happened, it sort of put the sand aside. And
well, of course, because
it washed away
there was so much of water. So when it flowed, everything, because natural course was already there.
Yes.
So it followed it. And that happens, mind you, in Gadrosia or what we call Balochistan now. The flash floods there are so strong because if you remember, when Alexander was going back, he was going overland, and his tent was hit by a flash flood.
Oh.
And he barely saved.
Here, near the Indus.
No, not in the.
Not
We are
Indus.
talking about Balochistan. When
Okay,
we're going back,
sort of, okay.
going back,
Right.
going back to Iran. And we have had, as a company, we have had an experience.
Really?
Way back in Balochistan, we were camping with a French group, and some rain happened about 200 kilometers away. And by the morning, that the water carrying the boulders and everything that hit
wow.
our camp.
That's
And they were, I mean, I don't know why the French tour operator insisted on camping there, because we are forbidden to camp in a dry up bed. Never we camp there. But
That's really asking for
she
trouble
insisted,
almost.
she asked for trouble. And then that flood carried away, one person died. Our jeeps were, totally
Oh my
like
gosh.
toys. It is so strong.
Everything was just swept away.
Swept away, because
Wow.
these flash floods are very common in Balochistan.
Which really sort of, it's a very clear picture of how how settlements can be washed
Absolutely,
away
they can
just
wash
as
away,
easily.
just because of things like that.
Even way back then, where walls weren't very strong, they didn't have
So,
concrete.
so that's why, because nothing has been excavated in Cholistan as well. They have identified
There's still
36 places.
a lot to be
There's
done.
a lot to be discovered, in our
Okay.
country.
We're just going to go to a quick break and stay with us. There's lots more fascinating things in store for you guys. See you in a minute. Hi, welcome back to the coffee table. Nice to see you again. We're still talking about artifacts and the fascinating history of the Cholistan and the Indus Valley civilization. But now I want to sort of steer the conversation back to what's going on in the world these days. So, Hannan, tell me, what are the sort of, where does international law stand on the return of artifacts?
Well, it fundamentally dates back to the 1970s UNESCO Convention on the prevention and the prohibition of, the export, import, and the transfer of cultural properties, as they name it. But there are two very important catches in that. Number one, UNESCO calling for a convention. These are one of many conventions that we had in the past. But the true test of a convention is whether or not it applies or turns into having legal force behind it, which we haven't seen for the past 4.5 decades. There are two things within that convention. Number one, that the first article, Article 1, defines cultural properties as those that are desired by a state because of archaeological, scientific, or research purposes. So if you're able to build a case based on having stolen artifacts being returned to you, we have various examples all across the world, Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, and all that. You would basically have to first establish how it would enrich your current pursuits for research. Unless you build that case, just kind of identifying yourself with the civilization would not be enough under the current standing of law.
Which is weirdly reductive, because
It is,
some
because
things you can't research something. Some things just, if their point of origin was country A, and if country A wants it back, then surely that should be enough.
The civilizational footprint, there's a catch over here. The civilizational footprint for that would kind of precede the nation-state notion, which is why they kind of believe in a universality of civilization. But the onus then falls on you. The second thing, which I think is very pertinent, is Article 11 kind of says that if there is an occupying power, a foreign occupying power in your country, then any theft would be regarded as illegal. And that, the main evidence as to why that hasn't been followed well is because late in December 2018, West Bank, which has been occupied by Israel, was able to take out artifacts that were absolutely sacred to that part of the world for Palestine and were publicly displayed in the Jerusalem Museum without having any sanctions behind it. And then, of course, we have certain notable powers such as the United States and Israel. They kind of let go of UNESCO, kind of, distance themselves from it. US formally let go of it as well. Because they're allied powers. So this politics and economics of civilizational theft is something that contributes to that, which is why international law, frankly, hasn't been so effective.
And in 1970 is very late in the day for this kind of global conversation to even start happening. Because, quite frankly, the reason why artifacts have been taken from countries is because they were colonized.
Absolutely.
And occupying powers just sort of took it and left.
I think I would agree on that it was a colonial product to begin with. For example, a majority of the museums that kind of house these artifacts, we talk about the British Museum, the Louvre in Paris, were all erected at a time when colonial and imperial influences in the world were at its peak. So they were basically erected for the purpose of kind of rehabilitating these artifacts and kind of integrating them.
And also sort of display of treasures that, you know, look at what we've done. They were trophies, essentially.
Yeah, for them, for example, from Egypt, Nefertiti's, that is in Berlin.
Yes, it's in Berlin now, yes. It's still there.
I mean, our dancing girl from Mohenjo-daro is in Delhi, in New Delhi. I mean, it should have been here, but you know, when they were dividing at the time of partition, so we got the king priest to, you know, and they got the dancing girl.
Even with Greek, you know, the Elgin marbles, which is like this extremely famous sort of case about artifacts not being returned. So it's quite a sort of complicated, it's a complicated conversation to have, because we have to sort of unpack what it is to be a post-colonial state as well. And on some level, even asking for an artifact back as a government, as sort of between governments, it must be a fraught thing.
To a certain degree it is, but a lot depends upon how proactive the current government is.
Right.
A positive example and a negative example both come into play. The positive side is that the government of Iran has been really proactive in the past 10 years. They've been able to get out about 1,540 key artifacts. We're talking 4 digits from 4 different countries. United States, which, as we all know, is a hell-bent adversary of Iran.
Absolutely.
Then we have the UAE, we have Belgium, and a few others as well. And then the government just a few months back had also said that 3,000 more were on its way. So, you know, you need to have a cultural wing that is absolutely
very active
on that front. And then on the negative side, we also see certain governments such as the government of Iraq, which I would not exactly put to blame just like that, because it has been through a long period of civil war. But one of the flashpoints of archaeological theft was in April 2003, when the Iraq Museum was basically stormed in by coalition forces, and 15,000 artifacts were taken off, 5,000 which were recovered. And then this is a museum that was under protective custody of the U.S. military.
Oh. Wow! So in spite of that, truckloads of artifacts.
Yeah, and then you know, so it's all voluntary. By the end of the day, we see France, as you mentioned before, Mina, most receptive out of all the countries. But does that reception resonate with the rest of the countries? I think that's where, you know, the allies and the adversary equation comes into play.
And it's also interesting to me to see that France has also returned artifacts to Benin, where France had colonized it and done a great deal of destruction. Benin was basically burnt down by French colonizers and just sort of literally razed to the ground. And in a way, it's sort of, I feel, for me at least, France making that gesture seems like a way, it's an apology, really.
But I'm wondering, how did France take all these things from here? They were not colonizing Pakistan or this part. So how did
somebody had taken them from here,
there we are.
And they were in France to be sold to an art gallery.
It is a $3 million industry, according to Times. This illicit trade of artifacts, and then of course the international arts market is totaled at $64 billion.
Wow.
So it's not to say that these countries, I would not exactly say there's a lot of evidence to kind of infer that countries or governments themselves are consciously getting these through. It is that, for example, there's a transnational network of clients. The 2019 BBC investigation into Facebook, for example, kind of unveiled that artifacts that were once looted in Syria, Aleppo and Raqqa, as well as Iraq, were being sold openly by unidentified,
soldiers have been doing it.
Clients.
Soldiers have just been taking things.
On trading groups. And that's only when these governments, these Western governments, realize that, okay, you know, these artifacts within our country. So you had some research wings being mobilized to kind of find out. So I think governments themselves kind of play into doing it as well. But the main question is that the artifacts that are known to belong to a certain civilization have been debated on before, not being returned consciously. For example, the Louvre had said that the ancient tombs, some of the relics that are in the Louvre, the government of France has said that they did not exactly know that they were undocumented artifacts, but still haven't been returned.
They got there in the first place, exactly.
That's a choice you make.
But I think Britain are not, they are very miser about that, you know, because they are not doing it.
You know, but they've interfered in so many countries across the world that I think that if they started giving things back, they'd have nothing left.
Well, they have nothing left.
the whole Egypt wing of the British Museum, empty. So tell me, Akhtar, as a tour guide and as somebody who's been sort of taking foreigners around the country and just different groups of people who are interested in sort of exploring this part of the world. Have you ever sort of seen people trying to buy things?
Yeah, always.
Put in the pocket.
See, but then they fall into that trap also, because there are plenty of fake things that are sold as real, and particularly when you go to Texas, there are plenty of people, trying to sell wines and this and that, but they're all fake, basically. But of course, people are interested in things if they can buy, but we keep them
keep
at
an
a
eye
distance,
on them,
of course,
because it interests me that if artifacts smuggled and stolen, because you can't run such a massive international, transnational art market on just sort of above ground trade. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of dodgy under the table stuff going on. But then there's also buyers. Who is buying all of this?
Well, as I mentioned before, one example of transnational clients happening, you have social media being activated for that. And it's a long, hefty report, which was backed by the Wall Street Journal last year as well. There's also terror financing sort of an element to it. I'll tell you the latest of it.
Terror financing?
In late 2018, CNBC had basically unveiled ISIS, the Syrian arm, which was basically holding open auctions in Raqqa, which has been one of the biggest contributors to Syrian civilization ever. And those were being, mobilizing private investors along with all that, and then the money being generated is being reinvested into expanding their territorial sort of a grasp in that region.
God.
And then we see these equivalents happening in the Arab Spring as well. When the Hosni Mubarak regime was being brought down, the Arab Spring protests were political, but at the same time, it also gave way to these looters to kind of storm into Egypt's capital and take away all those relics. And now, majority of which we see today in Germany, in Greece, and Britain as well. So governments, their intervention into other countries, whether through colonial or through armed conflict or through occupation, has basically given a resolve to bring private investors, illicit trafficking gangs together and create a terror financing criminal underground mechanism as well, which allows these non-state actors to keep benefiting as long as these interventions take place. The Gulf crisis hasn't been resolved, and I don't think that the repatriation of those relics at a time of conflict would seem to be a very optimistic analysis. That's one angle.
I think same has been happening in Afghanistan as well. A lot of things, because they had plenty of things, a lot of Buddhist relics and all those. So they have been, because if they can break the Buddha images, they have no respect for any relics. For them, it is just a piece of. And I mean, in what has happened in our areas also, in Takhtabai and here and that, you have broken noses and all that.
Things have been defaced.
Yes, defaced because people, and so many places that we had used to take them in Swat Valley, now they don't exist anymore, because people have been taking them away. Or even the main Buddha, in Swat Valley, that was saved by the army. Otherwise, that would have been finished like Bamiyan and all those other Buddhas. So this is the kind of a problem.
We're just going to take a quick break, and when we come back, there's going to be more on the ethics of buying artifacts and what can we do about that. So stay with us. Welcome back to the coffee table. Nice to see you again. So now I want to talk about how there is an argument presented by people who have the relics in their museums that they're better able to look after them. If there are artifacts from countries that are still in a state of unrest, and they are they're safe. They're safe in the British Museum, they're safe in the Louvre, they're safe in Berlin. But how do you think that argument holds water? That it's better to let the qualified people look after them because the actual owners of the artifacts won't be able to handle it?
Have enough chances been given to those owners to preserve them? That's the real question. If sufficient, if we have sufficient precedents of these very artifacts being shared with those countries failing it, then of course this argument would hold factual weight. Otherwise, I think on the surface, the infrastructure argument is partly true because obviously they do have it, which is why the market is based at such a sum as it is.
Yes.
But to say that all developing countries have kind of failed with that infrastructure, I don't think they've been given enough chances. But you've rightly pointed out, infrastructure, adequate infrastructure to hold and get us through has been a major part of the Western rationale for hosting them. For example, the 445 artifacts that we brought back, we got back in coordination with the French government, was actually a result of the National Center for Scientific Research in Paris kind of, identifying those traits over a period of about 10 to 11 years. And I think we don't, frankly, we need to be honest to ourselves as well. We, or by we, I mean every country that kind of wishes to have that, having adequate infrastructure for research and having adequate resolve to take forward that research are two different things. If we don't have the infrastructure, but we're kind of working on getting those things through to us, I think that would have made more sense. But frankly, it has been an initiative from France. They intercepted in 2006, brought it back forward. So I think if sufficient chances are given to these countries, to us as well, to do it, and we fail, then of course this argument is completely justified. But I think on Pakistan's part, at least, we need to kind of show our motivation to have these relics as part of active committees that continue to lobby for their, to get it repatriated. Otherwise, it's all on you'd say, on the basis of Western countries approaching us and telling us, hey, these relics, we belong to you and we want to give it back. Why can't we take forward the initiative?
Yeah, it's so paternalistic to say that, never mind, we look after it for you. We've got a nice refrigerated room. Just to put these scrolls in. And it's true, but the fact is that unless we have our artifacts, how are we going to develop an infrastructure? You can't develop sort of archival areas if you don't have anything to put in them. This is an empty room.
But in some cases in private, for example, one very good example, it may not be a very big museum, but Fakir Khana is a very good example that they have maintained all those things and they are still it's private owners, and it's coming from generation to generation. So that can happen in many cases.
It's not like we don't have the sensibility or even the capacity
there are people
to do
with sensibility. And now, of course, the museums we are building, we can build museum. Okay, we have inherited, the Lahore Museum was built by the British, fine, but we are building some other museums also in the remote area.
And I think that the Taxila Museum is quite a decent museum.
Quite a decent museum, yes, absolutely.
And they've whatever they've had.
The only problem that we have to appreciate, frankly speaking, the person who's in charge or the people who are in charge, the guardians of those museums are so poor that there is always a temptation of some money. And some things can be and have been stolen. Even in Mohenjo-daro Museum, things were taken away, or even out here, some things, sometimes replicas have been put there and replaced by the originals. So that, unfortunately, things are there. Now we have to understand that and we have to accept that also.
That structural problem does exist, especially in developing countries where we already are sort of strapped for cash to allocate in different areas. But I do feel, like you said, Hannan, that if we demonstrate enough commitment to wanting our artifacts back and wanting to create a sort of strength, it deepens our own sense of identity as a country, and not just a country, but as inhabitants of a particular area, to have our things back.
Yeah, I think
it's completely fair.
It's basic foreign policy, because if something belongs to you, I'd return it, not because I question whether or not you'll be able to preserve it, but because it belongs to you. The fundamental dispute is based on, a cultural property being, the West argues it is universal in design. And then, of course, the powers that have been colonized argue that, okay, we were never really given a voice at that time, and now we need to do that.
It's not like somebody asked permission, or this sort of, even if they bought it, how can you even say it was fair if some sort of,
my
boss comes and says, can I buy this for ₹1? And you're like, you can't say no. You're like, okay.
My counter argument for that is that, all of the artifacts, or all of the various diverse arsenals of artifacts that constitute them, that speak on the Western history's behalf, are with the West.
Yes.
So all of the components you need to kind of fulfill your traits or your roots back to where you belong from are with you. So I think it's only natural for another country that was colonized to kind of have the same ambition of doing that.
I think that's really important.
Yeah, so, we have so many missing puzzles over here, and that gets complicated even more when we hear Western powers who have been able to protect and preserve them really well. But I think the fundamental dispute still remains unaddressed. And the main point over here is that when you have notable powers such as the United States, Israel, and other many that kind of seem to resign from UNESCO again and again, that kind of really takes the strength away from any convention that was signed before them.
Absolutely.
They become unbinding, and that really complicates it. Israel, frankly, is an occupying power in Palestine, and the United States has had a history of having artifacts, not so much as the Europeans, and US has been kind of receptive in giving them back to Iran as well. But to continue that process, you need to have active stakeholders and regimes be part of that same process. You can't just be part of something and then withdraw from it. It really puts these countries at a disadvantage.
Quite right.
But now, Hannan, you see what is very positively happening. That I find I have been meeting, acting with a lot of these Sikh, they put the Maharaja, Ranjit Singh and all that. And they are getting very active that, okay, the Kohinoor belonged to us, give it back. And then you have that throne that was made by Hafiz Multani, the goldsmith from Multan, who made the throne for Maharaja Ranjit Singh. That has
Wasn't it the peacock throne? Was Ranjit
No.
Singh's
Peacock throne was Shah Jahan's.
Okay.
This was just
just a nice throne.
But beautiful throne, and that was taken away also. So they want it back.
Yes.
When they bring it back, they're not going to take it to Amritsar. This was their capital, Lahore.
Yes,
so they have to bring it back to Lahore. So if we can support, kind of thing, it's their claim, and there are so many others who claim to Kohinoor also.
And briefly adding to that, it's always about having good ties as well. Can you name a single precedent in history where artifacts were returned when countries did not have close political cooperation? It's always about gestures of goodwill. Even though France has returned this based on Macron's policy of kind of returning them to countries, you do see France kind of pushing for closer military cooperation with Pakistan.
Oh, okay. So it's like, we'll give you this, but then you also give us this back.
But that's okay.
So the timing,
okay, we can do it. That's what we can offer.
The timing cannot be coincidental, but at least they're doing it.
Exactly, and at least we're getting our things back, and it's a good example for smugglers also. Someone's going to catch you. But one thing that's almost sort of jokingly, we say this a lot, is that the British should give us the Kohinoor back. Do we want it back? Wouldn't it go to India then? Because if Ranjit Singh's throne was to come back and it would come to Lahore.
No, so would Kohinoor, because Ranjit Singh,
it was his
originally. Kohinoor was in Lahore. Kohinoor never went to Delhi. Just keep that in mind. It was always in Lahore. And so Lahore.
So yes, so if we do ask for the Kohinoor back, we can do it.
Yeah.
Just ask.
Just ask. Just give it back. Pop it out of that crown of yours. Get back to us. Which means we do have a leg to stand on. We can ask for it
anytime.
But I think that it's really important to remember that the repatriation of artifacts is not just cultural. It has an incredible significance for identity as a people. So asking for artifacts back is of course there's a sort of reclaiming of power of a post-colonial state, but it's also the reclamation of an identity to sort of go back to your roots and be able to trace your own history and your own trajectory.
Absolutely. And for your next generations also.
Absolutely. And I feel like in Pakistan we often talk about how our ancestors came from somewhere. We're descended from X or Y or Z. It's always someone from the outside, but we're not able to take ownership of ourselves who've been here all along.
All along, obviously.
And if we have those artifacts, and like you said, we can sort of fill in the gaps.
Yeah, and
in
then
our own
make that a complete process of learning.
Yeah.
As far as our
and then that also gives us, that we are a very old civilization.
Yes.
We are not only 47 se 72 saal koi hum baat karte rehte hain. Why? We are the oldest civilization around.
Absolutely, and we have so much to be proud of.
That, this is not a question.
No second thoughts about that.
Yeah,
nobody talks about that, and that's what we have to stress on our young generation also. Look, we are a very civilized, very old civilization, and we are
one of the oldest, and we have so much to be proud of for ourselves.
See, so many things that we can discuss, but Pakistan needs to be explored, and I insist that many people have to travel more, mix around more. We have to see south of Pakistan. I'm always promoting south of Pakistan.
And people need to stop becoming bankers and start becoming archaeologists and historians now, because there's still so much work to be done.
There's plenty of work to be done, and we are opening up as a country.
And that profession to kind of become an archaeologist could only become opportune for the coming generations when the government shows sufficient resolve.
Yes, absolutely.
That, okay, these are the horizons that we're looking to capture. Right now, it's all about repeating the same literature that we have and kind of reinforcing it, which frankly has minimum effect. I think Pakistan's, whenever I think of it, and I was talking to Sir before as well, the cultural DNA of Pakistan is so diverse that the north and the south seem like two different places, part of one. And in order to look at them in the micro details, will reveal such fascinating, insights that it'll help us in one way or the other. Absolutely.
Absolutely, I think it would just make us, how we also have a preoccupation with wanting to sort of represent ourselves to the world as a country and as a civilization, really, that is not violent, that has this really rich past.
Yes.
And we have all of it just sitting right here, just waiting for us to claim it. I think that's great.
You see,
We're really
basically, we have such a diversity. For example, if you start just counting the headgears in Pakistan, you'll be surprised.
Right. The different kinds of
the
turbans
topi and turbans, and you go up and to the north and all that. And Pakistan is the only country with 3 mountain ranges, mind you, in the world.
Yeah.
And each valley has got its own language, its own culture, so much of a diversity, and so colorful, and so, totally amazing.
Yes, absolutely. And on this very hopeful and very idealistic and really sort of lovely forward-looking note, we're going to wrap up the show. Thank you so much for being
Thank you
on the sofa with me. I think this was a fascinating conversation, and I'm sure that you guys enjoyed it very much. Don't steal artifacts. Thank you for being with us, and we'll see you next time. Bye.